famously as a long writer. Even my short stories are long. So I'm going to be reading from one tonight that's my first ever that I've put up on lulu.com as an e-story. It's available for purchase, and we're kind of experimenting in our writers group with doing e-publishing. I've tried to cut it down to stay within the 11-minute time frame. I hope it makes sense. I hope it stays around 11 minutes. I don't think it'll go much longer than that. And I hope at least you enjoy it enough to stick with it for 11 minutes without hauling me off the stage. I did take a few little nips out of it to try and cut the time down, so I hope it makes sense, and I hope I don't stumble too much by skipping a paragraph here or there. Things probably went wrong because she had nobody within 90 miles to help with the... Oh, let me preface this by saying, since we're starting in the middle, this is a humorous short story. It's about a young woman named Luella. She's a practicing witch in a small town in Missouri. She has a problem with one of her spells, and I wanted to make a disclaimer. I have a lot of friends who are witches, so, I don't want to offend anybody out there who happens to be practicing Wiccan or anything else. This is just meant for humor and fun, and not to get anybody excited. So, things probably went wrong because she had nobody within 90 miles to help with the ritual she was currently attempting to pull off. But then this was Amesville, Missouri, not Los Angeles or even Denver. You didn't just whip open the phone book and look up other witches. Thank the goddess for mail order and UPS. Without them, she'd never be able to find the tools she needed for her newfound spiritual life. A twinge did cross Luella's Midwest conscience. Perhaps it was undemocratic to manipulate the city council votes by witchcraft, but then it wasn't entirely for her own benefit. There were probably dozens of other small business owners in the same fix if the council decided to stand its ground on the new zoning ordinance up for a vote. And what made it acceptable for others to manipulate the city council for money and influence, like old Norm Fulton did? That man bore a distinct resemblance to the pigs that he raised on a tenant farm south of town. Owning half the businesses on Main Street shouldn't give him the right to shut down the other half of commerce. The dozens of people operating out of their houses, basements, garages, and the like. Luella's own basement beauty parlor, the Star Shop, was not the only home beauty salon. And what of local landmarks like Teddy Bears Only, Mrs. Wintel's boutique in her front living room, or Joy Harris' Gingerbread Castle, featuring homemade donuts sold from her sun porch on Tuesdays and Fridays. Luella took a deep breath and spread her arms. Anger must be put aside. There was no place for it in the sacred circle. This was not a place for personal revenge, but a holy site from which to petition the goddess herself for intervention in the affairs of men and women. Tonight, Fulton must fall. Figuratively, of course. Luella didn't want to kill anybody, and even if she did, she probably wasn't up to it. She'd only been practicing the craft for a year and a half. Besides, there wasn't much she could do to Norm. It would take a visit from the goddess herself to move that old chauvinist an inch. And then there was Petering. Now, Oscar Petering wasn't senile, but he was the next best thing to it. And whatever somebody else said was good enough for him, especially if it was Norm Fulton. According to the beauty parlor grapevine, all Luella needed to do was shift one vote, preferably Petering's, to send Norm and his zoning ordinance packing. All that she needed lay on the small cloth-covered altar before her. Salt for protection, silver candlesticks, a gray hair for Norm, and a red lock for Dick Red Hanley, scrounged from the barber, and a mandrake root as withered as Petering, and the book. It wasn't exactly the right book, as tradition required her to copy her own by hand from that of another witch, but that was impossible right now. And this one had come from a very reputable dealer listed online at the Cosmosis Emporium. Luella had just closed her eyes to achieve the proper attitude when a howl erupted from the bedroom below. Luella stamped her foot on the floor until the whole second story shook. Dang that dog! The goddess Diana probably didn't have anything against dogs, as she was also the huntress. But to be on the safe side, Gertrude, her dachshund, was locked up. The dachshund insisted on invading the sacred circle despite all threats, and Luella had nightmares of her being sucked up into the netherworld some night. course, if she had waited until midnight, the next interruption would never have come. Unfortunately, the council meeting started at 7 p.m. and it was almost 6:30 now. The vote could come at any moment once they started. Luella's heart was pounding as she raised the ritual knife, her prized athame, above her head to begin the incantation. Concentration and complete commitment were essential now. Diana, goddess, hear my plea. The sound of a chicken being strangled snapped the mood instantly. She had always hated the dulcet tones of that darn doorbell, but never more than now. Luella tried to ignore it, knowing it was a mistake to break the circle once it was set. But another strangled ring, this time accompanied by pounding, reminded her about the UPS man and Myrtle County. Myrtle was leaving Thursday for Florida, right after her weekly hair appointment at the Star Shop, and Luella had ordered her favorite color in perm on a rush. For one agonizing moment, Luella hesitated. The bell screamed again. She threw the knife on the altar, hitched up her gown, leapt over the candles, and charged down the steep old stairway. She flung the door open with greater force than she intended, thanks to a staggering gust of wind. What? The UPS boy, his hair standing nearly straight up in the wind, faltered at the sight of her plunging neckline and the wonders therein. Got a package for Miss Janet Wilson, 120 South Lake. Yes. Janet, also Luella, grabbed the clipboard and signed, one eye scanning the big box sitting next to the porch railing. She also caught a glimpse of her neighbor, Mason Jenkins, sneaking over towards the scraggly fence-lined hedge between their houses, pruning shears in hand. Pruning my foot, she thought, with a glare directed at Mason, who was blind as a bat with his new trifocals, but still blessed with all his hormones. The UPS boy grinned from ear to ear as she leaned over to grab the box. The wind, surprisingly cold, lifted the skirt of her gown shamelessly. Mason leaned too far forward and fell into the bushes. With a soft curse, Luella snatched up the package and leapt back inside. She slammed the door with less conviction than she intended, because the wind pushed back with supernatural strength and another howl just at that moment. The glass inset in the door rattled as she leaned against the closest wall, recovering her dignity and her attitude for the night's work. Once back upstairs, she took a deep breath and began again. She was running out of time. Diana, goddess, hear my plea. As the wind moves, so must ye. The wind moaned in answer and the eaves creaked. Luella took the mandrake root in hand, mentally picturing petering. Move this one from stone to sand, change the mind of one gray man. Gray must fade. She laid Norm's gray hair on the candle's flame and took up Dick Red Hanley's red curl, signed just a moment before setting that to the flame as well. And red must rise, all before Ra fills the skies. Again, she added mentally, since Ra had already set for the day. The elements of the spell so invoked, Luella straightened and spread her hands, abandoning herself to the moment, the ritual, and the goddess. The walls of her house, of Amesville, of her life, all retreated, and she was one with the universal power of the earth. Her voice was the voice of the world itself. Power grant to make it so. Change the mark from yes to no. Transform these males before night is o'er. Open the portals and shift the score. Zone of heartache, zone of dread, become the zone of joy instead. Grant us victory, let this spell soar, that justice might prevail once more. A deafening boom made Luella cringe, and terror swept her soul as all the candles extinguished suddenly, as if from a single hand. Chill air fell on her like a gnat and swirled through the garret room, sweeping up the lingering sound of her words and sucking them out again. Luella fell on her knees. Goddess, speak to your faithful servant. In answer, there was a less impressive thud, followed by another, and another, along with the telltale rattle of glass. Luella threw back her head and pounded her ample thighs with fists clenched in frustration. She scrambled up and down the steps ran down the steps as the air retreated, sucked back down and out through the now open front door like a giant vacuum cleaner. Wood and glass rattled as the wind turned and rushed in again. The door thudded against the wall once more, and in final insult, a dried flower arrangement went flying from the hall table. Darn! Luella slammed the door shut, barricading it this time with her body as the wind probed once more through the cracks and the massive antique keyhole. Gertrude wailed in the back bedroom as she realized exciting things were happening without her. Luella gritted her teeth and tore back upstairs to rescue what was left of the ritual. She stopped just inside the doorway to her inner sanctum at the top of the stairs. The candles were still on the floor, but no longer lit, of course. And the altar stood as it had, but something was wrong. She could feel it like an allergy rising on her skin. A soft draft of air pushed her hair and lifted the ruffled edge of the window curtains with a whisper. As the wind moves, so must we. Luella felt the edge of her gown lift like a live beast as it wrapped itself around her legs and spun her to face the other wall. Another breath of air caressed her cheek and then shoved her into the wall, nose first. With a yelp, she pushed back and spun to face the room with a rising sense of horror in her gut. "Oh my God," she whispered, reverting to her Methodist upbringing. "Oh my God, goddess!" She had broken the circle in her haste to deal with the door, and now her own words had just shoved her across the room and into the wall. Goddess only knew what had happened to the rest of the spell. Luella pressed her hands against her lips in a panic. There was nothing in the book about this possibility. She stumbled around the room, pressing her hands against the walls, the bookshelves, under the chairs. But wherever the rest of the spell was, it wasn't in the circle anymore. It wasn't even in the room. She headed for the steps, mind racing. Moving cautiously, she made her way downstairs. She didn't want to think what would happen if she wandered into a spell fragment floating around loose. But she descended to the bottom without another incident and stood a moment breathless. Gertrude howled again, and suddenly Luella knew the spell wasn't even in the house. What the heck was she supposed to do now? Call the police and report a missing spell? Taking action and solace in action, even mindless action, she ran to the back bedroom. Gertrude, delighted at being released from prison, tried to express her gratitude, nearly tripping Luella as she changed hastily into a sweatsuit and sneakers. The dog voiced her dismay again as Luella locked her in once more and ran for the front door. Outside, the wind was throwing a tantrum, sending not only old leaves flying, but fair-sized branches as well. Two hit her in the face. Luella paused on the front stoop, stuck again. She couldn't even see a spell. How the heck was she supposed to retrieve one? As if in answer, an eerie blue light from above her began to brighten the young night. Luella tilted her head back slowly, half afraid to look up. The streetlight between her house and Mason's was glowing strangely, bathing her in a blue halogen spotlight. It crackled. An arc of delicate electricity, like a light bulb's burning filament, circled the lamp's head. Then the streetlight suddenly faded back to normal and the electric shimmer swirled down the pole. Halfway to the ground, it sparked and snapped as the wind snatched it away into the air. Luella heard a word pass by, like a voice in the back of her head. Power. There was a crack, and Mason's new riding lawnmower flared to life with a roar that sounded like the whole Indy 500 had just fired up. Mason's porch light went on, as did a few more up and down the block. This time it was Luella who dove into the bushes as the old man stepped out, calling back to his wife. "Just them dang kids again, honey." She heard him come down the steps, cut the engine with a mutter, and tramp back up to his door. The door shut and the porch light went off, followed by others up the street. Luella began breathing again. She glanced around as she crawled out of the hedge, trying to decide what to do. In the alley behind the houses, another street light flared. So she ran through her backyard and the gate to the alley, but slowed as she rounded the corner of her own garage. Clearly, the wind had ripped the spell asunder, and parts were floating around like so much pollen, certain to awaken whatever they landed on. One wrong move and she'd get a spell in the face, or run into something worse than a lawnmower. She stepped into the back alley, seeing nothing. Her shoulders sagged, and then the eerie sound of the Twilight Zone theme music wafted through the evening air. Dee-da-dee-da, dee-da-dee-da, dee-da-dee-da. The sound was followed by a tasteless snicker that emanated from Luella's own detached garage. Slowly she turned to face the consequences of her meddling in the universal powers, and grabbed her hair in frustration. A large marmalade cat with well-scarred ears and bright green eyes sat on the trunk of her car, grinning at her. That useless Shamus! She'd chased him out of her yard more than 20 times this spring, where he spent his sunny days lying in wait under the bird bath. They had often exchanged insults from afar, including some appalling suggestions from the cat about Gertrude's safety. Shamus licked one paw casually, amused at her fury. "So, Toots, this a new invocation technique? Or maybe did you lose something? Luella stalked toward the cat. You murdering little vulture, get off that car. The cat twirled his whiskers with another infuriating grin. Another unsuccessful experiment? You're one sorry excuse for a witch, Toots, even though I'm sure you could get a job with Hallmark posing for their Halloween line. The cat jumped easily to the roof of her 2001 Buick as Luella made a grab for him. Hey, 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 watch the fur, I just took a bath. Cool your jets, Toots. Like it's my fault that your spell is floating around hometown USA? Luella stiffened. What do you know about it, Fleabag? That is not the way to ask for help, sweet cakes. Help from you? Luella recovered her dignity and took a deep breath. I'll help you. I'll turn you into a... Oh, come on, baby. You couldn't turn bread into toast. You need old shamus, and my fees are very reasonable. The cat peered at Luella's face, his eyes incredibly bright in the dark old garage. She doesn't believe me. What's the matter, sweetheart? Don't you know anything about witchcraft? What the heck do you think all those old girls kept familiars around for? Especially us cats. Shamus' tail rose in a derogatory question mark as he stood up on tiptoe in sheer self-importance. Luella bit her lip, unwilling to reveal her ignorance. The cat sat down again, cocking his head at her with a smirk as he explained. Well, you see, my little innocent, familiars have some useful traits. Cats, for example, can see spells. So if you lose a word here or there, you can get it back. Of course, most witches don't lose the whole darn thing, Shamus added, rolling his eyes. All right, where is it then? First, we talk contract, Toots. It didn't take long to negotiate. Shamus's last mistress had been old Miss Willingston, who had lived in a modest bungalow over on Marcus Street. She had passed away near Christmas without kin. It came as a shock to realize that another witch had been living quietly in Amesville for 50 years, right under Luella's nose. But it was no surprise that her familiar, Shamus, had been too smart to end up in the animal shelter and too arrogant to find a kindly neighbor. In return for his services, and a promise not to harm Gertrude, Luella agreed to provide a comfortable life suitable to an old cat about town, including gourmet fare. Now, where is it? Luella demanded. The cat stood up, arched, and stretched languidly. Gotta go look for it. Hey, 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 don't damage the radar. Shamus ducked as her hands went for his neck. He tested both sets of whiskers with a roll before leaping to the ground. Okay, this way. I saw some of it go right past before you got here, but man, it didn't make a bit of sense. This may take some time. Half an hour later, Luella was contemplating another assault on Shamus's throat. They had prowled up and down several streets near Luella's house and were now only a block south of Main Street. More than once, she'd seen the street lights in the distance flare up with a bluish tinge, followed by a pop that nearly stopped her heart. Thank goddess the hospital, with its massive electrical system, was a good 11 miles west in Centertown. But her comfort was short-lived as the streetlight closest to them began to brighten with unearthly luminescence. Shamus froze, nose up and whiskers twirling. He spun and ran towards a thick hedge, calling to Luella, Got one! Come on! Unfortunately, Shamus neglected to consider his size versus her bulk. The cat vanished under a sturdy hedge, while Lorena ran up and down the property line seeking an opening. Finally, she pushed through a crevice in the thorny mass, stifling a yelp or two. She stopped at the site in the backyard of the house the hedge surrounded. It was now floodlit from one of the oversexed streetlights from above. Shamus was sitting back on his haunches, poised for flight, and staring at a large German shepherd in the door of a doghouse. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt stood on the back steps of the house. Luella immediately flashed her most charming grin and grabbed Shamus, all 20 pounds of him, hanging from her arms. Oh, sorry to bother you, lost my cat, and... A flashbulb exploded. Luella jumped and Shamus tore out of her grip. But it hadn't been a flashbulb. Where the man had been, a large German shepherd wearing a flannel shirt and jeans now stood staring at her, while his master huddled, naked as a blue jay and on all fours, in the door of the doghouse. Instantly, the flashbulb exploded again, and the spell bounced back, and the man stood once more on the steps. Split second later, another pop, and the dog was wearing the flannel shirt again, standing on the back steps. Luella staggered as Shamus, with one bound, suddenly deposited all of his bulk on her shoulder. Hoo, boy, you did it this time. Must have been a transform spell. Caught in a loop, too. Luella tried to get her mind to start up again. Yeah, a transform spell. She suddenly remembered with a gulp. Transform these males before night is over. Wait, Well, Shamus eyed the man who was standing on the back steps again. You certainly got the transform part right. The loop is pretty amazing. Must have something to do with the storm coming in. Ionized air and that kind of crap. Oh goddess, what am I gonna do? Well, hey, you're the witch. Sort of, Shamus sighed. Look, just lay a freeze on him until we can think of something better. I saw something head for Mayfair Way. We better do the whole house just to be on the safe side. Don't want the little woman coming out and thinking her hubby's getting it on with the dog, huh? Yuck, dogs. What are they seeing them? Shamus cocked his head at her suspiciously. You do know how to do a freeze, don't you?